On today's show, we're going to be talking about how we can start thinking outside the box when it comes to mainstream and alternative news headlines so we can have a deeper discussion. In the second 2 hours, we're going to get into remote viewing and separate fact from fiction there, as well as explore the story of Julie Gerberding and how there's big corporations have a very big influence or a lot of tight connections as to what goes on with government policymakers. I'm Joe Martino, and this is the Collective Evolution Show. Okay, welcome to another episode here. So today we're switching things up a little bit. I'm wearing a hat. Not only that, but before doing this, I had actually thought, we could either do some interesting subjects here, or we could, watch cat videos for like 25 minutes, which we're going to be going with the subjects. And specifically, what we're going to kind of get into deeply here is something that comes up a lot, right? It's the idea of this. Look, we can look at, the idea of it's all about spirituality. It's all about positivity. It's all about just, staying in your lane, creating your own world, creating your reality and just focusing on that and just, that sort of thing. And in a lot of cases when we do that and when we look at our lives through that manner, we start to get very, very, very confined into just us, just our own thing. And I get how there's like this relationship between people often will think, well, yeah, change starts within, meaning like, I'm focusing on my thing and I'm making myself to be the best version I possibly can. But that's not why we're here. We're not here to just, live the best version of the best, best you possibly can, gain the most success and blah, 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 blah. We're here to collectively have an experience together and enrich not only our souls as individuals, but our souls as a collective, enrich the human experience as we go. But the key here is we're here to experience this world together as a collective. That's why there's billions of souls on the planet at this time, because if it wasn't about us having a collective experience and really creating things collectively, guess what? We probably wouldn't be having experiences where we're, interacting with so many humans. Perhaps it would just be a small amount sharing this planet going forward with life. So what this means is we need to start looking at the world. And this is, again, why we decided to do CETV. This is why we've been covering media and so forth for the past 10 years is, I didn't want to get into media when I first started doing, stuff about exploring self, exploring consciousness and all that sort of stuff. Media wasn't like, hey, I'm excited to do this. We did media because it was like, hold on a second. This is a incredible avenue to be able to relate the world. Because what happens in the world, right? All the different politics, the way we see business, the way we see, different interactions that are happening between countries, all of this stuff is a reflection of our human consciousness, right? Both on a macro level, but on an individual level. And, our push is to say we need to start looking at these things with a conscious undertone. We need to start thinking about these things in a bigger picture sense than just, oh, well, this person's bad and this person's evil, or this person is opposing this person and because of the reasons of party politics and so forth. We need to start actually thinking, what the heck is causing us to look at things in this manner and start exploring the world and some of the things that happen with a little bit of a different thought process so we can start seeing beyond some of what mainstream media is saying, some of what alternative media is saying, which kind of holds us into a specific box, right, of what's going on in the world, and we start expanding that box and we start asking bigger and better questions as to how we can change things. So the way we're going to do that in this segment is we're going to start looking at different headlines and that are going on right now, and we're going to start examining, hey, what sort of is going on here in a bigger picture game, not just with this headline, but also in a bigger picture sense. And you probably have seen one or two of these headlines floating around the internet, which is why I decided to sort of cover them in this manner. Because again, it's just about kind of like bringing in a bigger picture. And by the time we wrap up this segment, we're going to kind of have a deeper understanding of how I feel we need to go about having conversations with people. Not just, here doing this, but having conversations at a political level. Having conversations, when people are in interviews and they're higher profile figures. And instead of just keeping everything to just this, sort of simple area in this tiny box down here, what about having a bit of a deeper conversation? So let's start this. We're going to look a little bit at politics here. And I have a headline here from The Independent. AOC, which is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for those who don't know. AOC responds to conservative critics who accuse her of using Southern black scent, in quotation, to speak to African American audience. All right, so AOC was at the annual convention for Al Sharpton's National Action Network, and it was a predominantly black audience. And of course, she's addressing them and she's saying various things. And in quotations here, she says, "I'm proud to be a bartender. Ain't nothing wrong with that," she said while drawing out some of the vowels. "There's nothing wrong with working retail, folding clothes for other people to buy. There is nothing wrong with preparing the food that your neighbors will eat. There is nothing wrong with driving the buses that take your family to work." So in essence, when she's doing this speech, she's talking in a little bit of a different accent. She's sort of drawing out certain vowels, certain things to allegedly connect deeper with the audience. And of course, then the conservative media starts attacking this as, oh, she's changing her accent, she's not being authentic, and la-da-da-da. And, she's just trying to connect deeper with a black audience. And then that, of course, is met with, various claims from the other side saying, well, and don't forget, Hillary Clinton, not just Ocasio-Cortez, but Hillary Clinton also appeared to change her accent when speaking to black audiences in the States, in South Carolina. And of course, that's an issue too. So here it is, we're taking, hey, let's speak to people. And as we're speaking to people, as we're having conversations with people, we're now judging how someone is choosing to relate to that audience. Now, if we pull out right or wrong from this entire situation, we just look at what's happening, very blatantly, very quickly, we just start to see Ocasio-Cortez, like her or not, she's having a speech, she's talking to different people. Conservative media, which is in the opposite political party as this over here, decides to bring up this idea saying, hey, you know what, she shouldn't be doing this. Let's create a whole bunch of media kerfuffle and all this drama back and forth, basically just ego going back and forth at each other, right? And then what do we start doing? Instead of talking more deeply about some of the issues, about the stuff that's going on, about the stuff that really connects us, about where we're really going with stuff, we focus entirely on the meaningless conjecture of what's going on. And it's odd because the conservative media probably also decided to go with this because they know how much the left right now is up in arms and borderline just like almost insane when it comes to the way cultural appropriation, that's racist, that's sexist, that's this, that's that, which is again, is all just an egoic game that's being played here. So here you have in the media, the way, this was a huge story. She had to come back and she had to tweet Ocasio-Cortez here. Folks talking about my voice can step right off. Women's March and Kavanaugh speech, same. Any kid who grew up in the distinct linguistic culture and had to learn to navigate class enviros at school/work knows what's up. My Spanish is the same way. These conspiracy mills are, and then she puts a little emoticon for trash. And it's interesting because she's not wrong. People naturally, generally sort of just, sometimes you fall in naturally to different accents or to the way people speak in specific cultures. No one owns a culture. No one owns a way of speaking. You're not allowed nor not allowed to go around and speak in different ways to connect with different people. In fact, in a lot of ways, I grew up, with having some aunts and uncles who were Italian speaking, and that was their first language, and that's everything, when they would speak, their English was somewhat broken, and it was significantly easier for me to communicate with them when I spoke in what is more like a broken English than when I was speaking just my full-on regular English, right? So what are we trying to say here? What's actually going on? Well, at the end of the day, she's just basically doing something that actually makes it easier for people to connect a little bit. And at the media level and at the conservative level, which I'm sure we're going to see tons of memes of conservatives who love to just break down different politicians, just sharing stuff. Oh, and now she's this, now she's that, now the racist, now the left should be mad at her because she's doing things that are racist and all these different things. And that's what's going to happen in these types of situations. And so why is this even a story, right? What we got to start reflecting on here is the idea that politics is nothing more than this back and forth, find a way to beat somebody else at a way where, so this is the politics happening here, and the general public is down here observing all this stuff. What they're doing is saying, okay, well, let's create something tied through our media that gets this general populace to have doubt or to have negative emotions about this particular politician over here. So what do you start to see in this entire situation? You start to see that this is not about policy. This is not about creating a world that truly is going to work for people and for, that's really trying to solve a lot of the different challenges and issues that we have today. No, the majority of what we see, likewise what we saw for the last 2 years with the Russian collusion on Trump there and what the mainstream media did there, This is about character assassination. This is about trying to convince the public, manipulate the public into thinking that they shouldn't like somebody or that somebody's wrong. So instead of talking about the facts, okay, this person's wrong for this. Let's just get to the emotions here. Let's get the public to be emotionally against someone, right? And that's oftentimes what happens. So we got to start thinking about this. We got to start saying, okay, hold on a second. When we really observe politics, right, and we start thinking about what it represents and then why we buy into it, we start seeing it's like in a lot of cases, the majority of what happens is nothing more than smear campaigns, finding ways. Have you ever seen like political ads where it's like, one party will pay for an ad that's just basically slamming the other party? And it's like, what is the point of this? Why do we have to slam somebody to get a vote? Why are we, focused so much on stories that are not stories? They're nothing more than distractions. Well, some people will say, okay, it's the elite, right? And which partly this is true, right? This is one ingredient to the puzzle. The elite likes to keep people distracted. It's very important that people stay distracted. They stay sort of against each other and so forth, right? Talking about things that are meaningless. Well, yeah, that's part of the puzzle, but it still takes the populace to be unconscious enough to say, that's a story that we should get distracted by. It's not as though there's like this magic pill that gets put out that's like, oh, there's the distraction pill. As soon as that hits, humanity, we're suddenly all distracted. It's like, no, it's all right, here's a line. I'm going fishing. Here's a line in the water. Are you going to take the bait? You going to, and it's up to humanity to take the bait. And this is why we talk about things in this manner, is it's about gaining a consciousness. We're coming out from being unconscious, we're gaining a consciousness, and once you see something, just like a magician, you learn. I used to do magic when I was younger, and I was always amazed by magicians. And then, when I started to learn magic and pick it apart, and I became a little bit of a street magician myself, suddenly everything that I saw magic-wise, I knew exactly what was going on. It was no longer magic to me. It was very rare that you'd find something where like, wow, that really fooled me, right? What is that? What is going on there? Once you see something, things don't work on you in the same way. Once you see the media is manipulating us in particular ways to keep us in the emotions, to make politics about two people fighting back and forth, to see that it's like we're talking way less about what Trump is actually doing, and instead we're just talking about how he's racist, sexist, he's this, he's that, KKK. Like, we're taking the worst of 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 the things that we can dig up or find or pathetically relate to different politicians. And then we're saying, this is what it's all about. We're more concerned with being victims than we are with actually addressing what's going on. And this is why it's like we need to, like, this example, this is one example, right? This isn't just the story. This is one example of how our approach to politics is, it's just manipulation of the masses. That's all it is. If we can create identities by which people say, yeah, that sounds like me, even if, we have years and years and years and years of experience knowing this, right? What the politicians do when they get in power does not represent majority of what either people want, nor does it represent what they actually campaign for. The reality of the situation is, it's like all it is about getting the public to accept that they have some sort of say, that they have some sort of power, and that there is some sort of direction that they feel they're choosing. That's the purpose of politics here. And as this relates to human consciousness, look at what happens, right? You see the manipulation of the public, getting people all caught up and stuff. We're not even told the truth half the time on a lot of things that are happening. Look at the last 2 years. Whether you agree with Trump or not, it doesn't matter. It's completely irrelevant, right? That's not what this conversation's about. It's look how a story, the scary Russians, which has been a propaganda piece the US has been using on its populace for decades now. Let's go do it again. The reality of the situation is, and why this becomes clear. And again, this isn't a, pro-Hillary, anti-Hillary, pro-Trump, anti-Trump. Throw that aside for a second. Look at the two candidates. One, Hillary Clinton, has a incredibly strong and evidential tie to Russian, quote unquote, conspiracy or Russian collusion, however you want to look at it. Trump has almost nil There's one meeting that really can be focused on, and we talked about this in one of our previous broadcasts. One meeting that can really be focused on. If anybody were to objectively look at this, they would go, well, if we were going to investigate anything, we'd investigate here. That's what we do. But we're not objectively looking at it, because what happens is it's okay, there's a struggle in power here, and the people who control the media, and the people who are involved in all this sort of stuff are not going to be, focused on the thing that we should actually do. We need to be focused on the thing that will start pulling our power back, will start dividing the public again, will start keeping people from witnessing this power struggle starting to fall apart, which if you haven't heard us cover, we've covered this many, many times over our articles, videos, and so forth. What this Trump presidency really represents is just a divide in power struggles, right? Or divide in power. You had the deep state who really had been choosing Hillary Clinton for the next president. Then you had a divide within some of the intelligence community that worked as a group with Trump as the puppet master to essentially go, you know what? No, we're going to take the planet in a bit of a new direction, right? And okay, or not the planet, but the country in a bit of a new direction, right? So boom, they start going in that direction. And that's all that happened. And, on the spiritual conscious community side, we're trying to be like, oh, maybe he's the savior. Oh yeah, he's doing this. Or it's like, no. Look at it clearly. We were here. We took a little step away from this old power structure. That will cause us to ask a lot of questions, to start exploring things, to start seeing a difference. Business isn't quite as usual. The elite are in panic. That's very obvious that the elite are panicked. They're trying to turn it as you should be panicked because this guy who's allegedly racist and this and that and all these different things is destroying the fabric of society, which is totally not happening if you actually look at it. The only thing destroying the fabric of society is the media, pushing for all of this racial divide and all of this crap that's inflating people in these issues in a way where it's like, oh my God, this stuff's so real, this stuff's such a huge problem, we need to start focusing on it 24/7, right? And the reality of the situation is, where this benefits is that when it inflates and when it comes up, we start going, oh, okay, that's what's happening. Oh, okay, I can see how our thought processes work. So again, while we're thinking, oh my God, it's chaos, what the deep state's doing is so bad, it's also working to disempower themselves because their actions become so obvious. And so long as we have these types of conversations and we talk about politics in this manner and really start examining what's going on, we're going to start to see this is just a little game that's going on and the media is manipulating us. And now there's all these efforts because the media is losing its power. It's losing its influence. Only 45% of the U.S. populace, in a Gallup poll, recent Gallup poll, has any faith in the media. So as the faith, or mainstream media, as the faith in mainstream media starts to fall and people are all of a sudden it's like, well, we need to try and get it back. So now we're creating all these fake news watchdogs that are going to come out there and that are going to make sure that alternative media has all this doubt within it. But that makes it even more obvious, gives us another reason to reflect, another reason to ask bigger questions. Why do we think we need to play the games that we're playing? Why do we get so caught up in the latest Trump drama? Why do we get so caught up in the latest, AOC drama? Like I see people on that are running these massive YouTube channels that are absolutely just destroying these politicians and making fun of them. And it's really easy when a politician says something to take their thing, then go spend a bunch of hours picking apart everything that they said and then produce a show that basically just buries them. That's easy to do, right? It would be great to see some more live debates and stuff, which is, hey, if you want to do that, by all means. But the point of the situation is we're stuck in this layer of thinking. We're stuck in this level where it's like, well, politics is so goddamn important and it's everything, right? So we need to stay within this little tiny confining box that none of us are comfortable in, right? We like it because we're addicted to it, but we're in this really confining box. And let's talk about everything through the lens of politics. Yay, right? And that's what we're doing. And so what the purpose is here is like, okay, let's strip away this box for a second. Why do we think everything needs to happen like this, where we need to bury politicians every time they say something we don't like? Why do we want to play into a system that just manipulates the public into believing what someone says more than another person? using these emotionally manipulative tactics all the time? Why is it that we believe that egos that are out of control, right? Which is really what this is. When your ego is out of control, when your ego runs your experience, which you can watch Elevate season 2 and go through the list of episodes there. There's a number of stuff that helps to break this down in a much deeper way. But when the ego is out of control and it's running the show, it's running your life, it's running your decision making, it's from that state of being that we're looking at all these different politicians, not as humans, not as souls, but just as like, oh, red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. Oh, okay, now so I need to manipulate these people to see this person one way, need to manipulate these people to see that person one way, right? And we feed into that game and we play into that game. And when we hear the things that I'm talking about, we go, yeah, I know we're right. Yeah, we're right. But then like all of a sudden, a tweet will come out and we'll just get caught right back up into the drama of it all. This person, blah, blah, blah. I'll never forget some of the moments where, here I'm at an event for Conscious Media. It's supposed to be this really big conscious event. And it was in many ways. And you have some prominent conscious figures. They were all females. And they were just absolutely trashing Trump, men, everything that was going on with that entire situation and so forth. And I'm just sitting here listening to this like, this is what conscious media is. This is what's behind conscious media, this form of thinking. Because the reality of the situation is this. It's about where you exist authentically at all times. Not just when you're meditating. Not just when you're out in the park hiking. Not just when you're on your own in your bedroom writing in your journal. It's not these bits of clarity that I care about. There's a bazillion people who write the self-help books of all self-help books that are like, this is going to be the next one to save your life. This is the course that's going to do it. But what are those people doing when it comes to the thick? When it comes to what's actually going on out there? When it comes to talking about politics, which is, again, our way of doing this is not about burying your head in the sand and saying, oh, well, to focus on all this stuff is negative. I just need to focus on, evolving my consciousness. Well, part of evolving consciousness means looking out at the world with some level of courage and saying, why is this happening? What's going on here? Yeah, I'm not going to get caught up in all the drama and all the negativity and and I don't need to watch it constantly. But I can turn on conscious media and I could say, okay, what is actually going on? What causes humanity? Okay, now that I understand that, let's go have conversations with people that create a new culture of how we look at our world. Because if we avoid that conversation and we just stay caught up in what alternative media is saying, we just stay caught up in what mainstream media is saying, then we're not really going to have the deeper discussions that allow us to think differently about our world, nor are we going to actually understand our world. What we're going to do is we're going to repeat the same process over and over and over and over again, which is what we're seeing. So let's move on to another headline to understand this a little bit deeper. This happened over in the business world. Now we're going to unpack this one a little bit. The headline is, Lyft threatens to sue Uber's lead underwriter for helping to crash its stock. Now, this came out of a story that was published in the Washington Post, and it essentially looked at how one of Uber's lead underwriters, which was Morgan Stanley, allegedly started selling shorts on the Lyft stock prior to the IPO, which, in essence, what that does is it puts power, right? And when you buy a short, it means you think something's going to fall in the business world or in the stock market world. So what happens is we're going to start selling these shorts, meaning we're putting potential gain in the hands of specific people so that if it goes down, right? So now there's demand for it to go down so that these people win, right? So we put out enough of those. We sell enough of those. This is allegedly what happened, right? We sell enough of those so that the stock price, when it comes out, it just kind of goes and it tumbles and tumbles and tumbles. And when we look at what happened, it started out at $87, it tumbled down to $72, and then it kept going over the next 2 days lower and lower and lower. I'm not sure where it's at today because I didn't actually check leading up to this. But the point is this, it doesn't matter where it's at today. It could be at $60, could be at $50. It doesn't really matter. The point is it's going down. The purpose here is to talk about how, from a business perspective, right? From the way these companies do things, right? So first of all, you could say, well, why is Lyft thinking that their greatest competitor is in this conspiracy? That's kind of crazy for them to think that Uber would care that much that they would want to, tumble the stock of Lyft. And it's like, well, yeah, that's one way of talking about it. Oh, it's also, yeah, I mean, of course, Uber would potentially do that because they're in this mode of competition and it's all about, nobody wants to lose their foothold in the marketplace. So of course, Lyft is going to do this and they're going to say what they're going to say and they're justified in saying that. Okay, well, that's another way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is if we can see so clearly that that's what we're doing as humanity, right? We see, yeah, that's part of the world. It's part of capitalism. It's part of the survival of the fittest. We say that as if it's like this badge of honor to wear. Oh, survival of the fittest. Only the best survive. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. Ha. Why is it a dog-eat-dog world? Why are we okay with seeing companies and people and governments just fighting against each other constantly? Why are we accepting that that's just the way it is and that it needs to be that way? When I look at a headline like this, I think, oh, well, it's interesting that a company would potentially care that much to do something like that if it allegedly happened. But not only that, I think, and I go to the consciousness and I say, man, we're in a state where we're not working together. We're in a state where this is about me as an individual. And why do we say that? Why isn't it not just company versus company? Well, because those decisions are made by a person, a panel of people, potentially to do this. So let's say Uber did in fact do this. It's not clear that whether they entirely did this yet, right? So let's say there was a panel of people that decided to, oh, you know what, let's work with Morgan Stanley here, see if we can get some shorts to be sold so that, when I say shorts, I think of shorts. But let's say we get some shorts to be sold so that ultimately we can get, hey, maybe their stock price tumbles a little bit. They don't get as much cash because why is it beneficial for their stock price to be up? For people to buy it at that price, they get a lot of liquid cash. They get a lot of investment into the company. It's a way for them to say, okay, now we can expand, right? Well, we don't want them to expand if we're Uber. Let's just say, right? I keep going back to this. I don't want people thinking this for sure happened because we don't know yet. But the point is it's like, why are we doing that as humanity? What about us? Why are we so concerned with our own individual survival only that we don't think about other people? And this is interesting because we start looking at how people will tell you, oh, well, that's just the way it is. That's the way we're wired. Your individual survival is wired to be that way. Well, I've done a lot of research over my 10 years and I've found a number of different things that say completely otherwise. In fact, I've seen aspects of our ancient history that show that we at one point actually were never at war as humanity. We didn't fight each other. We were actually at peace and we worked together in communities. And that's what we did. And when one community would meet another community, there wasn't war. There was only times of war when cataclysms happened. When there was an extreme, uncontrollable threat to survival. That's when we started to see times of war. But even at that, we don't really know exactly what happened, right? So there's a couple ways to look at this. We see this is the way humans operate. And this is what we accept is okay. This is part of the business world. The business world's ugly. The business world doesn't have to be ugly. In fact, there doesn't even have to be a business world, which we're going to get to in a different discussion a little bit later on in this segment. But the business world does not have to be ugly. It doesn't have to be, oh my God, we need to be competing with one. I deal with a lot of companies at Collective Evolution. We've worked with tons of people. Never have I ever sat down with anyone and tried to take advantage of a situation, tried to think about how I could win in a particular situation. Sure, companies have tried to do it to us at different points, and it's really about them trying to see, hey, how can I win here and how can I use Collective Evolution to win? That happens. But I've never done that. Why? Because that's not within my being to do that. And there are tons of other people on the planet that operate in that exact same way. So which tells us that, yes, it's a matter of a state of consciousness that is how these things happen. And the reality of the situation is if we just continue to keep accepting and continue to keep opting into that world of, okay, well, business is like this, and when it's my turn and I go into business, or when you'll see the average person doing their thing, and then all of a sudden they go down to the local farmers market sort of thing, and suddenly they have something to sell, and all of a sudden now they're like, okay, how can I? All the business stuff that they saw on the television set, that they heard, all these different things that they believe this is the way it's supposed to be. Oh yeah, how can I find a way to take advantage of all these people that are selling by maybe making up my bunches a little smaller of what I'm going to try and sell. Of maybe, trying to hike up the price a little bit so that if they talk me down, it's still a win for me and all. We start doing all of these things that are about me and my survival, not yours. Me and my survival, it's about me, right? And this is the reality of the situation. And again, it goes back to conscious media. Why I think it's important is because we need to start having these conversations of, should it have been legal or illegal for Uber to do that ethically? Instead of hold on a second. Why do we exist in this world? Why do we accept this reality that we're always just fighting for who's the best and who can win and who can take the biggest advantage? Why is that what we've accepted as a state of being? And there's a number of different things to unpack that. That'll go deeper into of course we need to do it because we need money to survive. Well, of course we need to do it because it's a free market and this is what we do and this is how, we put money on the table and this is how we feed ourselves. Okay, well, let's talk about that a little bit deeper. But the point is it's we are existing in a situation where, like it or not, we exist in these small pods, okay? Businesses, small, tight communities, family structures, and so forth, where we're all working for just our own survival. And by nature, that means we're trying to compete with every other person out there and every other business out there to get ahead or to get a favorable position. So the question that we have to ask, is this truly our nature, which I deeply challenge you, and I'm going to do an episode on this just by saying this, we have to. But is this truly our nature? It's not. I can tell you that already. And not only that, but why do we accept this as this is how it has to be? And why do we not have bigger conversations about, okay, does it need to be this way? And if not, how else can we do this? And how else can we have this conversation and create a culture and create a way of being that isn't operating like this? Because the reality situation is all we're told over and over again is this is just how it is. That's just how it is. That's it. And so we all just accept it and then we join the game. And then we talk about how we want change. We talk about how we want it to be different. But then as soon as push comes to shove, we're not ready to let go of the idea of, but I could become the best. I could become the biggest. I could become whatever it may be. And that happens in the conscious business community too. There's a company doing it right now, trying to become the owner of all of it. We control the whole situation, right? So the point is it's about looking at this thing on a deeper level. And so I want to jump into this next headline real quick here. This is actually a cool story, really interesting, but it's something, I love it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it at all, but there's a deeper aspect here that I think will be interesting. So the headline here is Sikhs aim to plant millions of trees as gift to the planet, right? So essentially what happened is it's almost 550 years since the birth of the Sikh religion's founder, Guru Nanak. And so what they've said is, hey, around the world, we're going to try and plant 1 million new trees, right? Which is great. So, in some of the images here, you're seeing pictures of different people in their own area planting trees. This is part of an overall effort amongst the entire religion around the world to do this. And this is great, right? This is a very good way of humanity sort of saying, you know what, I'm going to take action and I'm going to do something that is going to help the planet, because we recognize that there is some environmental degradation going on, right? And a lot of it is, when it comes to the degradation of clear-cutting forests, of poisoning our waterways, of doing all these sorts of things, it's very clear that humanity is doing this. There's no way of saying that we're not polluting, that we're not degrading our environment and so forth. The CO2 discussion is a completely different discussion that we'll have to get into at another time. But even just look at it this way, right? You have people on the ground that are saying, hey, well, we're going to plant trees, we're going to do this stuff. Then you have the CO2 discussion that's happening at the governmental level, where I just got a thing in the mail saying that due to Canada's new carbon plan, next year your energy costs are going to have an extra $3. The propane that I use to heat my house, it's going to be another $3 a liter. By 2022, it's going to be, 3 cents a liter. By 2022, it's going to be another 7 cents a liter. So they're just going to keep increasing it, for this carbon CO2 credit sort of stuff, right? And, allegedly they're going to take that money and they're going to invest in infrastructure that's going to move us away from fossil fuels and so forth. And la-di-da-di-da-di-da. How people deal with it, how government deals with it, right? The reality of the situation is we exist in an overall climate where, one, we've been told false information about what's going on that pulls the responsibility away from the fact that our system and infrastructure, okay? So the elephant in the room, with my phone for right now, is that our system and infrastructure of how we operate and our desire that we have to hold on to the way we live. There has to be, all these industries, there has to be money, there has to be debt. We need to live this way. The elephant in the room is that. We can't look at that because then we start to realize that it's this thing right here, the way we live our lives, the system as it is today, that we're so unwilling to change, or really the elite's unwilling to give up control of this, right? And most people don't even understand how this works. And this is why it's important. It's not like someone just said, oh, okay, yeah, it's a free market. I created this system and bingo bango. No, they manipulated and lied to people to create this system, right? So anyway, here's the elephant in the room. It's sitting there. And instead of addressing this, we create and fabricate all these stories so that humanity's attention is, instead of here, it's over here. Oh, climate change is our fault. Oh, because I drive a car, it's my fault. Oh, CO2 is the only discussion. Instead of saying, hold on a second, why is there so much pollution? I'm going to put this down. Why is there so much pollution? Okay, well, within the system that exists today, it's difficult for businesses financially to operate such that they can create a product without having waste or without having issues or without using the shittiest stuff, because the shittiest stuff produces the worst waste, or it breaks down. We have more emissions, more landfills, more this, more that, right? It's more beneficial for companies to cut corners, to put food on their table, to pay all the people that need money to survive within this planet, because we live, just like we spoke about before, in a world where we're all competing against one another. We're not working together, we're competing against one another. So it's more beneficial for these companies to do this. Well, therefore, it's too hard to just like, okay, stop pollution, to stop this, to stop that, right? So let's not talk about that. Let's talk about CO2. And CO2 is like this pollution that's like, oh my God, like, this creates CO2, that creates CO2, that creates CO2, that creates CO2, this. Okay, well, how about just the quality of our air? How about the quality of our water? How about the quality of our soils? We are bigging up Monsanto in the news and media. Oh, great, companies solving all these issues, poisoning the soil, destroying the waterways. People have been talking about this for years, destroying it. Just now, we start to have some court cases, we covered this in the last episode, where people are now being awarded a ton of money for how glyphosate, which is again how the soil is being poisoned and how the waterways are being poisoned, is linked to non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And one was awarded $80 million and the other one was awarded $78 million, both court cases against Monsanto. Okay, so we know, and we've known this for a long time, the evidence has been there, the science has been manipulated and so forth many times to try and protect Monsanto, but the media is on Monsanto's side, the regulation is on Monsanto's side, so it's the government again. Then you have all of these corporations who are tied with different regulators that are allowing this stuff to continue to happen. We know there's a problem over here with the pollution that's legitimate, but no, let's big that up and then not really talk about that and just focus over here on CO2, obsessively focus on CO2. Look at the icebergs that are breaking over here. Look at this stuff that's happening over here. Hold on a second. This is the actual issue. The actual issue is we operate within a system that we don't want to address, that does not allow for people, corporations, companies to thrive unless it is constant cutting of corners and moving and evolving insanely slowly. This is the discussion. not this. This is a distraction, and it's utterly bullshit if you actually look at it. If you do the research like we have many times, if you look at the scientists, if you look at the people who say, you know what, the CO2 the argument is pretty weak. Environmental pollution degradation, yeah, that's a big thing. There's no denying any of that. But this thing, I don't know why this is such a big discussion. This leads to further taxation and stops us from having to look at this, right? It stops us from having to look at it, the fact that it's this system that we live in, where we are now at a point where global debt is $244 trillion. Well, who do we owe the money to? Who does each government, who does each country owe the money to? Oh, well, private bankers. Okay, well, how did private bankers get into this situation where they're able to control the flow of money into society with debt attached to it, so that from the get-go, the government is in debt, thus the banks are in debt, thus the people are in debt? That sounds like slavery to me. That sounds like from the get-go of how money enters into our society, we're enslaved. Well, how do these private bankers, why are they in that situation? Oh, okay, well, now you start following where these private bankers, who they are, what families they are, how many forgot the name for a 100-year cycle, centuries they've been in power for. And you start looking at that, and then you look at where their influence is, what industries they help to control, how they sort of have different people in different positions that are allowing for an overall systematic control. You can't have a conversation about politics, about business, about this kind of stuff. You can't have a conversation about it without talking about the elephant in the room. I get very sort of I watch, for example, I'm not calling him out in any sort of negative way here, but we often watch a lot of the big thinkers of today, like Jordan Peterson, who I do like. I like his work a lot. We talk about Ben Shapiro as well, big thinker, very intelligent dude. But there's no conversation of the bigger underlying issue, the elephant in the room, as to why society is the way it is partly. There's no conversation about that. It's back to that little politics box. Oh, it needs to all fit within this box. Well, let's just talk about this. Let's just talk about this. Every time a new idea is presented, I was watching an interview with Andrew Yang. I'm going to double check the name. Andrew Yang, guy running for president. Asian man in the United States running for president. Yeah, Andrew Yang. He's an American entrepreneur. Look him up. He says a lot of interesting things. I haven't seen everything he said, so I'm not sure if I agree with everything he says. So I'm just going to come out and say that. But I've listened to him say a number of very interesting things, and I'm thinking to myself. So every time he brings something forward, all the questions are, well, how is that going to fit into our system? Well, how are you going to have universal basic income? And what's going to happen over here? And then how's that going to affect this over here? And then some of his underlying ideas are, I want people via universal basic income, $1,000. You opt in if you want it, or you just don't want it, no big deal. So he brings this forward and he says, yeah, I think it's important as an underlying idea that people are, the example he used is you get the boot off their neck, so they're not like, oh my God, I can't live my life. You get the boot off their neck, which is debt and financial and slavery, and you say, here's a little bit of money, and how is this going to create a healthier society, a better society that allows for this, that, whatever. Sure, we're still talking within the confines of our current system, but how does this start to create a better society? And everyone's like, oh, well, who's going to pay for that, and what's going to happen, and blah, blah, blah. This is a bad idea because of this. People aren't going to work. People aren't going to do this. People aren't going to do that. And we come up with all these reasons that we don't know yet. And yes, there's been testing for different various aspects of universal basic income. And we always find different reasons for why we could support it or why we can't support it. And we relate it to the system at hand. And what we start to understand is that there's multi-factors involved in almost every of these situations, which we're going to get to as one of our final points here. But bring up this idea, let's get the boot off people's neck. And all of a sudden you realize, what is his ultimate goal? He wants people to be more inclined to do what they love or to do things that they're highly interested in without constantly being fearful of whether or not they can survive. Well, why is he saying this? Because it represents every single human being on this planet. Everybody. If you were to take 1,000 people. Guide them through a 5-10 minute meditation where they just detach from the world as it is today for a moment. Detach from everything they feel and how it all needs to be. All the different, it all has to be like this. You detach them from this little tiny box that we live in. And then you say, okay, now imagine for a second, you get to do something that you're really inclined to do, that you really, really want to do. What does that look like? What are you doing? How often would you want to do that? And so forth, right? Okay, well now I'm potentially doing this for, a couple days a week. And, 5, 6 hours, 7, maybe 8, maybe 12 if I get really into it that day, right? Okay, so you start to realize that in a lot of cases, every single person at their deepest core would totally enjoy and totally love living and doing what they wish to do, and would easily work within a system where if we could find out a way through automation, through shared tasks, through micro communities existing within larger communities and larger communities, we could create sustenance without the need for exchange constantly. And I could do more of the things that I wish to do, and don't think about it in terms of the world today, right? That's why we did the meditation. You first have to pull yourself out of this for a second. You realize that this is at our core. This is how we want to live. We want to be in a state where we're not enslaved by money, because we know it's possible, right? We've been convinced it's not, but we know it's possible. Now you come back here for a second, you say, okay, we got two different worlds. Now that we know this is possible, how do we move from this world to that world? What is it going to take? Well, what we're doing right now is we're saying, as a utopia, this is crazy, let's come back to this world, and it all has to exist within this tiny little confines. So every time a person like Andrew Yang comes forth with this idea for, hey, we can do this where, we can live in a way where, maybe we're doing what we love a little more. Small idea. That's socialism. That's a problem. It sounds like we're moving into communism now. Oh my God, we have all these terms to deflect these ideas. And then we have all these questions that try and fit it into the confines of this tiny little baby box. The note I had for today's show was, we're trying to fit a ton of great ideas into a tiny box. Why are we doing that? When are we going to have the discussion about the elephant in the room? That is, we exist within a system that does not allow us to thrive. When are we going to stop doing the mental gymnastics that we watch on a lot of these prominent internet TV shows now, where it's like, oh, well, this system here and that system, okay, well, this, and then how are we going to do that? And then, okay, so if you're going to pay people with this, that's going to cost $1.2 trillion. So then where are you going to get that money from? And then where are you going to get this? And, the world's in $244 trillion worth of debt, and blah, blah, blah. Do you enjoy that? Is that fun? Is that fun to listen to? Is that fun to try and deconstruct all the little ideas of how we're going to take these great ideas and try and fit them into the system, realizing we can't, so then we throw out these ideas and then we just come back to, okay, well, we'll just keep living as it is. Shouldn't the people with great ideas, isn't that a sign that perhaps humanity as a whole is trying to evolve, is trying to move forward, and that this is more about this idea that, I've said a number of times and been talking about for years, which is when we move out of the mode, and we could start at the country level if we really want. But when we move out of the mode of stopping the conversation of we have to fit everything into this tiny system we have today, and it's true, right? We try and fit everything into this tiny system. When we move out of that mode and into a mode where we're going to say, okay, for a second, let's let go of what we think how it all has to be. And I know, I can hear you as you're watching this. You're finding all these reasons as to why this could never be, as to why no one would ever change, as to why no system would ever allow this, as all these powerful people, and this is one of the illusions, all these powerful people that wear the suits, that walk around, that do things like that, we don't even connect with them as being humans. And that's the illusion. We look at them through this little box, like you're looking at me, but we look at them through this little box, and we make it out to be as if they're just a non-human being that is going about doing it. They're larger than life, and they're huge, and whatever For them to get in that position must mean they're like insanely brilliant, insanely intelligent, and all the people around them are all insanely intelligent. And they're saying things that I don't quite understand and that are like kind of complicated, and I can't wrap my head around some of this stuff. Therefore, I'm just going to leave it to them because they're probably right. And we're never really going to think outside of what they're saying. We see them as like, yeah, these are the people that make the decisions. But the reality of the situation is, and I've learned this a lot over my years as I went from starting this company when I was in my early 20s and now being almost 32 years old and having met a ton of very prominent figures from around the world and being like, some of these people that I thought were like insanely brilliant, they're an average person that's similar to myself. Or in some cases, I'm like, they were amazed by things I said, right? And vice versa. It happens all over the place with that. So you start to realize like, well, my ideas are valuable. What I believe, what I connect with is valuable. And if I think, anybody watching this, that we can live in a world where we don't have to be enslaved by $244 trillion of debt that's just owed to a private corporation that has designed this system to enslave the population through money and finance, then we can probably live in a world like that. Because the reality of the situation is, tons of people are thinking this, but it just keeps getting squashed. And all of the important conversations, they just revert back to, how are we going to fit it into this tiny little box? And we keep bigging up these intellects and these thinkers. Again, there's a purpose to them. I truly believe that a lot of these people that are popular today are helping humanity think a little bit more deeply about issues, get out of the crazy emotional, like, it's all about racism, it's all about gender inequality, these are pieces. And most of what people call evidence to these things is not even true to begin with. So these guys are out there helping people, and there's women out there doing it too, helping people become more grounded in looking at their world. And I like to view our work as, all right, now let's blow the doors off and say, what do we really want to do? How do we really want to move forward? And then it's going to start with conversations. It's going to start with giving ourselves the permission to look at some of the headlines we talked about today. Drop the bullshit analytics and start looking at, why does this actually happen? What aspect of humanity's consciousness actually does this? When are we going to admit we live within a destructive nature? When I say nature, I don't mean human nature. This is how it is. Nature in the sense of this is our way of being right now is a destructive state of consciousness, state of being that is just continually reinforced by the system at hand. We think we're solving issues by looking at this thing called CO2 that apparently is, once we tax people, we're going to save everything. But we're not going to address the elephant in the room, which is that there's this gigantic issue with the system at hand that makes it impossible for us to actually bring forth any of these incredible ideas because all the people that are invested in it, mentally, emotionally, physically, and financially, are not willing to let it go. And then they convince us as to why we need to hold on to all this stuff exactly as it is, even though it doesn't feel good for everybody, even though there's billions of people that are starving, that don't have food, that don't have shelter, that don't have basic needs. And I'm not saying it's the responsibility of like, you have a responsibility to take care of everybody. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, do you want to play the game like this anymore? And if not, when push comes to shove, are you willing to take a step out of it? And now this is where I want to talk on the final piece of this segment. To step out of it, what does that look like? Does it mean that we got to go off grid and go hide in the forest or go live in a tiny home and give up our amenities and give up this? Does it mean that we have to run a business that doesn't sell anything, that instead just gives everything away for free and finds other ways to monetize? Does it mean that we need to find a way to not use fiat currency? No, that's not exactly what this is saying. There's a multi-factored, nuanced conversation to this that needs to be had over time, and we need to really explore and discuss and bring together different ideas. But from a simplistic point of view, what we're going to talk about just today, is the idea that it's more so about pulling the need, pulling the unchallenged belief, pulling the strong energetic connection, the strong investment we have within the system out. It's about saying, look, we still gotta charge memberships because I gotta turn on these lights. I gotta get this thing. I gotta do this thing so that I need paper. I need ink to print on the paper, right? That costs money, right? I gotta drink a beverage. That costs money, right? Anyway, so the point is it's like, so I got to charge right now because our world in our current state is living in that. However, I can use those resources and I can use my state of being, my state of consciousness and so forth. I know I'm already uninvested in the system. I understand that I'm still a human regardless, that exists with more means and more needs and more means and more resources than probably the average human in the world when you really balance it out in a big way, right? Even here in Canada, I mean, I live pretty comfortably. But the reality of the situation is, I would easily let it all go for everyone to be in a situation where we're operating off of whether I don't think we necessarily need an economy, but whether you want to call something like a resource-based economy, whether you call it working together in our ways to really come together and start building ways of being that are beyond money, beyond exchange, beyond slavery. The technology is there. The technology, I've seen it with my own eyes. The technology to put a car, not on batteries that end up in a landfill. You could put a car on devices that'll drive this car however long you want, forever. You would have to repair some parts. You'd have to lube up some bearings. Over 10 years, you see a lot of things in this space. I've seen devices fully working, powering things, okay? A good chunk of power too. We're talking over 2 kilowatts. That could power this whole building I'm in right now. That could be created in series. That power this whole block over here. That power the whole city. And guess what? Once you start them, once you get them going, you don't need anything, right? Guess what? Those lines, that infrastructure is there. You ever have a storm? You need to repair the line, the infrastructure? You'd find a community to come together and do it. It would happen. There's such things as volunteer firefighters. Why? Because, hey, people want to make sure that the community is okay. That's part of the process. We have this illusion, and this is why I say do the meditation first. We have this illusion that to our own devices, to our own means, we'd all just sit back, play video games, and do fucking nothing all the time. And then when they do the study on universal basic income, what do they find? That in some cases, people that aren't working, that are just collecting universal basic income, end up just getting into drug habits and alcohol habits and so forth and sit down and do nothing. Well, it's like, well, yeah, why? Have they been given, the proper opportunity? Have they been guided? Where in school do we learn how to connect with ourselves? How to really explore and get past some of the patterns that we have within our minds? You can't just, we'll throw some money at the problem and hopefully it'll fix itself. Universal basic income, in my opinion, from a societal structure of today, also has to come with this idea of maybe we also need to start thinking about how we culturally, i.e. make it a widespread thing, help people think differently, help people process their emotions, help people. At the political level, we're still talking about how, we'll just throw some money at it. Oh, yeah, well, if we have universal basic, who's going to pay for all this stuff? But we don't talk about how we also need to help people develop themselves. Not just for work, develop themselves as human beings to be at a state of peace and joy within themselves. Oh, we just try and connect money to happiness. When the economy's good, people are happy. That's not true. We know that's not true. Hypothetically, economy's been growing in the United States and Canada, North America, if you want to look at it that way. And yet, depression rates, suicide rates are also growing. Why? Because we need to start thinking outside of this tiny little box. We know that we have incredible ideas, we have incredible possibility, the technology's there. We're lied to about the fact that I was at a symposium one time. A representative from Chevrolet, the Volt, the car runs on battery. He came in and he said, no other battery exists that can run longer than the battery we have in this car. Engineers haven't created it yet. Bullshit. The technology has been in secret access programs and black budget programs for a long time. We just had written an article about a week prior about a battery that could run, I don't recall the actual number, but for a very, very long time. The reality of the situation is that these people, if they had to tell the truth, if politicians were standing up there telling the truth, if people like Ben Shapiro and so forth, who are having a huge impact on society, and I still think in a positive way in some ways, but there's much more to the conversation, would be saying things like, yeah, we have all the technologies to do this stuff. We need to start talking about how we shift the way we see our world and what we think it has to be, and start saying, let's open up and create this panel of people. However, whether it doesn't matter, it's not politically oriented anyway. It's not something that's going to decide that they're going to take a monopoly over everything. It doesn't matter. Take all the business out of it. Take all the corruption out of it. You create a panel of individuals, incredible minds, because there's tons of them. They already exist today. They're already trying to do it. It's just we don't take it seriously because we don't know about it. You create a panel of people that help figure out how societies can transition from the world we are today into a world where we don't require this stuff. Jacques Fresto used to talk about this stuff all the time. It's possible. We have to want it. And from a consciousness level, what that looks like for how we create that world, because these conversations slowly build. So how do we create that world? It goes back to, pulling my investment out, my energetic and mental and consciousness investment in what I think it has to be. I can still use money. That just because you use money, it doesn't mean that like, oh my God, we're just supporting the system. No. It's the fact that we're not having the conversations. It's the fact that we're not normalizing this as something that needs to be talked about. Instead, we just get caught back up into the politics, creating the memes, making fun of AOC all the time. Where does that lead us? Where does making fun of a politician constantly, because the left and the right are both guilty of this, and independents that look at the left and the right are guilty of this as well. Where does that lead us? Nowhere. We get stuck in emotional judgment states. That's it. Still in the box. So we need to start having these conversations. That's what this is about. That's why I wanted to do this segment. Hopefully you stuck with it. Because it's like, yeah, we can look at some headlines, and we could do this all day long, looking at different headlines and talking about them in these ways. The point is, we need to awaken this greater understanding, this greater knowing that we can see our world in a completely different way. And we need to start to practice that. We need to start to do that more often, which is why we created CETV, which is why we create Conscious Media. And Conscious Media isn't just, here's how you meditate, here's how you do yoga. Conscious Media is the totality of what it means to be a human on this planet, looking at the experience that we have today and saying, okay, this is our world. How did it get this way? How do we expand our consciousness to understand, to see through the layers, and then to start thinking about what's possible? And the more of us that expand that idea of what's possible, talk about it, share it, do it from a grounded, neutral perspective, not these people are fucked and these people are trying to do this and that's happening and we need to fucking kill these people and bring them to justice and blah, blah, blah. All old world crap. Right? You see the Q community all the time. I think Q has some interesting validity to it. I think there's very interesting awakening possibilities of what's going on there. There's a purpose to it. There is also a culture that sometimes comes along with the Q stuff. Not Q, not necessarily the fact that the information's coming out. It's not the fault of that. It's being able to look at the result of how the humanity's consciousness looks at the information and turns it into savior mode. We see it in every Hollywood movie. We see it in the Jesus story of Christianity, Jesus, right? We see it all over the place. Someone comes to save us. The Alliance is going to save us. This is doing all the work. And then we stop thinking about this in terms of how we do our inner work to see the world differently. And we just kind of think about, oh, look at the next little bit of drama that's coming up here. Oh, this is exciting. Okay, yeah, this just happened. Oh, yeah, it proves this. It proves that, which is good. There's an information side to this awakening. That's important. But we got to get out of savior mode because there's so much of that going on. It's unreal. So anyway, let's wrap up this segment. Point here is, we unpacked a lot here. There's no denying that. We just unpacked a lot. But the reality of the situation is we need to start making it a habit And we're going to do that here on CETV. We're going to do that with conscious media. We're reinventing the way media is told. It's an evolution of media that aligns with authenticity, that aligns with who we truly are. Not the belief systems, like it or not, that's what they are, that we adhere to, that are figments of our mind. Yes, you see them out there in the systems and the structures, but they don't have to be there. These belief systems don't have to create that. We can etch out these belief systems, get back into full potential. If we want, we can create new ideas that create out there. And these are fluid, making that fluid. So we're not so rigid. So we're not so tied to how things need to be. That's why we're going to have these conversations. And that's been segment 1 of Collective Evolution Show. Coming up in hour 2 and 3, we're going to be talking about, I already forgot because I talked so much here. We're going to be talking about remote viewing. We're going to get into sort of the fact and the fiction of that. We're going to get a little bit into the government stuff related to that. We're going to be talking with Arjun Walia on that specific subject. And then we're going to get into looking at, again, the corporate stuff. So again, examining business, examining the consciousness of how the business works. And we're going to see how our unconsciousness creates some of the business stuff that we're seeing today with revolving doors when it comes to policy regulators, corporations, and back to policy regulators, and how they maintain control of the industry and of public perception through that revolving door. And we're going to be talking about Julie Gerberding when we do that, and it's likely Richard Enos is going to be in here exploring that with me. So if you check this out on the podcast and you like this episode, be sure to watch the other 2 hours on CETV. You can sign up for $9.99 a month, or you could do $99 for the year. Obviously, you're supporting our work. You're getting involved in conversations like this, which is what this is all about. And we have tons of other stuff on CETV, more shows, more interviews, and everything like that. If coming up on hour 2 and 3, if you want to check that out, you got to do that on the podcast. Otherwise, if you're watching on CETV, enjoy the upcoming 2 hours. Peace.